Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me again today. And I have such an exciting discussion with such an amazing lady today. Her name is Valentina Lozano Nasi. I will let her introduce herself shortly. We're here to talk about an interesting concept that she coined called Transilience. And I encourage you to read this article that she wrote called entitled Can We Do More Than Bounce Back? Transilience in the face of climate change risk. Now, in the Caribbean, we talk a lot about bouncing back, a lot about build back better. In the first place, I don't like that word back, and language matters, words matter. We don't want to go back because even if we think about 2019 before COVID, um, it's not that we were getting everything right in any event. I think for most of us in the Caribbean, we were on the wrong path. And do we really want to go back to that? I would argue no. I would argue that we want to be somewhere different. We want to transform into something that we should have been in any event. And that's why I'm here to talk to Valentina and talk about this word transilience that she came up with. So I'm going to hand over to Valentina now. Valentina, thank you so much for joining us. Please introduce yourself and then we can talk about transilience.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. Well, I'm Valentina Lozano Nasi. I am Italo-Colombian, and I currently reside in the Netherlands. And I would define myself as a specialist in human adaptation and climate psychology. So I moved to the Netherlands to study environmental psychology. So the whole behavioral and psychological aspects related to addressing the environmental crisis. And then I decided to pursue a PhD in the psychology of climate change adaptation. And while doing the PhD, I developed this new construct, Transilience, that we're going to talk about.
Fantastic. So assume that I'm an 8-year-old because I'm not much better than that in any event. Explain to me, first of all, I did not even know before I found your work, I did not even know. And it was Melissa who found you and said, you have to read this. This is amazing. And so then we're huge fangirls, as you know by now.
Thank you.
I didn't even know that climate psychology, climate, sorry, yes.
Environmental
I
psychology is called
Sorry,
officially.
environmental
No, no
psych.
problem. You can
I
also
didn't
say
even
climate change psychology.
climate change. I didn't even know that that existed.
Yeah, that's very common.
Right, and so this is all very fascinating to me. But explain to us, like, and explain to me, like I'm an 8-year-old, what exactly is climate? Sorry, environmental psychology, and what is transilience?
Okay, so uh, I will start with environmental psychology first. So,
Mm-hmm.
environmental psychology, as I mentioned, is about understanding the human aspect of our environmental crisis. So, traditionally, our like climate change has been studied by disciplines that are more technical or more naturalistic, but the essence of the environmental crisis is human behavior, and in order to
Absolutely.
address the environmental crisis, we need to focus on human behavior and to change human behavior in most cases. So this new discipline was like emerged, and initially it came out as trying to understand how artificial environments have an influence on people's psychology. That was more like in the domain of architecture, and it's still the case. But then there was also this other, let's say, branch that started asking the question, okay, but how do we influence the environment? And that's where the whole environmental psychology domain came out. And now I think it is quite popular in Europe, But when I did the master here in the Netherlands, the master here in Groningen, which is the city where I live, was one of the very, very few in Europe that existed. So that's why I decided to move here. So that's about environmental psychology, so the human aspect of addressing the environmental crisis. And with Transilience, so I I came up with it while trying to understand how we can adapt to climate change. I felt that there was something missing in resilience and in the whole resilience discourse. So I don't know. Imagine that you're walking on a tightrope, and there is like a gust of wind. So if you think about resilience, resilience means how do you maintain yourself? How do you recover your balance on the tightrope
And
despite
not fall off.
the fact? Whereas transilience asks, well, maybe the tightrope is broken in the first place or is leading nowhere. So maybe the way to adapt to this gust of wind is to build something else, to build a bridge, or maybe even to fly. So the idea is that instead of maintaining or recovering what you had in spite of adversity, so I studied it in the case of climate change and also COVID, you use the confrontation with the adversity to change, to evolve, to understand what's wrong, what is not working. And instead of building back better, the idea is to build something else.
I love that analogy of the tightrope. Thank you. Because if you think about, so of course, you're thinking about it at the individual level. And of course, all economics is ultimately a behavioral science, right? Because humans are the economic actors. So I
Yeah.
love that sort of nexus between the two. But when I think about countries, and this is what I think about all the time, small island developing states in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, for example, we are on a journey, right? All countries are on a journey. And when you think about it as a tightrope, you're absolutely right. We're all on a tightrope that's sort of delicate. We're on a delicate journey, and we get derailed when there is a pandemic, when there is sort of a natural disaster, and that can really throw a lot of our development journey off track. And so I absolutely love that analogy where you can think of, okay, so if we're on a tightrope and every time some adversity hits us, we can fall off, and then we have to rely on multilateral lending, for example, IMF, World Bank, to intervene and pull us back onto the tightrope. But shouldn't we really not be on a tightrope? Shouldn't we, as you said, shouldn't we be on a bridge instead?
Mm-hmm.
Or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of more stable trajectory, more stable journey towards development than a tightrope? But so that's a lovely analogy. So now when I think about, let's take a country, I like to talk about Jamaica, I love to talk about the Cayman Islands. These are countries that I think have gotten it more right,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their development than the rest of us in the Caribbean. And
Yeah.
certainly there's a lot of lessons we can learn from both of them and from other countries too. But let's look at Jamaica. And of course, most people all over the world, when I meet anybody and they're like, where are you from? And I say Trinidad and Tobago, and they're like, is that in Africa? Is that in South America? I'm like, no, it's in the Caribbean. What? And say, do you know Jamaica? Everybody knows Jamaica. So let's focus on
Right.
Jamaica.
Easy access.
Yes, exactly. So if we think of Jamaica and we think that Jamaica is sort of on a tightrope, but maybe a wider tightrope than the
Yeah.
rest of us. It's got a little more stability. It's got a little more. They got a few more things right than say my country did. Really, what we want to think about is how do you even improve that, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
resilience, which is making sure we stay on the tightrope. We want to
Mm-hmm.
think about how do we convert this tightrope into a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what are the conditions that I guess should exist, whether individual or we can think about it in the context of a country. What are those conditions that make for transilience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and unfortunately, it's a question that I didn't manage to study during my PhD. So I forgot to mention that I am not continuing currently with an academic career. So I left academia after my PhD. So at the moment, I'm not doing research on transilience. It might change, but so I didn't manage to study many things that are very interesting about transilience. And one of the key questions that were left open after my PhD is precisely how do we increase transilience? Like, okay, we see that
Yeah.
people score on the transilience scale. So I developed a scale to measure transilience. It's validated. People score on it. The more they score on it, the more likely they are to act, to adapt, and the better they are doing. So the higher their well being. But we didn't
Well,
manage to study.
tell us about that scale, though, please. Sorry to interrupt you,
Oh
but tell
yeah,
us about
sorry.
that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't mention it before. Yeah, so basically when I came up with, so I have a background in philosophy as well. So I was really into this conceptual understanding of, okay, so if it's not resilience, what is it? And I was reading all these articles about complex systems that adapt to when they change because of the adversity and not when they preserve because of in spite of the adversity. So I first came up with the construct. So I called it transilience because etymologically is about going to another place instead of going back. So resilience, like re from Latin, means going back, and
Mm-hmm.
trans means going to somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question is like, okay, in order to understand whether transilience is a thing, we need to be able to measure it. So in psychology, it works that in order to measure psychological constructs, so I think this is something that I need to specify. So transilience is a psychological was thought as a psychological construct. So it's kind of like tapping into people's psychology, people's mindset. And so what we did is that we developed a tool to measure the level of transilience in people. And there are all kinds of like complicated techniques, statistical stuff to understand how valid an instrument is, because it's not that you just write a set of questions and people say agree, disagree, and that's a tool. Like, you need to show that it's like a proper tool and that it has certain properties and that it's actually measuring something. So all my studies were conducted with this scale that has currently, I think the long version has 12 items and the short version has 9. And we use the studies also to refine the scale and to make it better. And so there we were able to give people a certain score. So, okay, this is the level of transilience on average, and then we could see if it correlated with certain other measures like well-being, like adaptation intention. And so that's what we found. We found that the higher the transilience, the better they are doing, the more likely they are to act. And very interestingly, when people score high on transilience, that doesn't mean that people don't see the problem, because that was also one of my concerns, that I don't want to tap into any form of denial. Like, I don't want people who think like, oh yeah, this is going to be fine because there is no problem in climate change. But actually what we found is that it is not the case that when people are scoring high in transilience, they see less the problem of climate change, or they see less the risks of the pandemic. So we were able to also demonstrate that there is no denial in there. So this is about the scale. Then I can
Right.
move back to your original question about what are the conditions for transilience. And so, as I said, we focused on developing this because also the PhD has a limited time frame. So I focused on developing the tool, on validating it, and then on understanding whether, because that was also a thing, like what if they score on this scale but then it doesn't mean anything. Like, they score on a scale but that doesn't mean that they are more likely to act or that they are more likely to feel good. So first we wanted to see really this relationship with other constructs, and that was basically what we did. And we did it across many countries, well, many, several, all Western, so I am missing like the areas that are mostly affected by climate change, like the Caribbean. And we did
We
it
can fix that.
yeah, definitely. And we studied it in the face of climate change, in the face of COVID, and we studied it at the individual level. So the perception about I, so because transilience is defined as the perceived capacity to persist, adapt flexibly, and positively transform in the face of a certain adversity. So we can go into the components, because I theorize that there are these three components in transilience. And so you can measure it at the level of I. So I think about my perceived capacity to adapt, but you can also measure it at the collective level. And that means
Right.
that I think about my perception of the extent to which we can adapt. So our adaptive capacity as a community, as a neighborhood, as a country. You can study all these levels. We didn't manage to do that, but we did manage to compare in a couple of studies individual and collective transilience. So that's
Mm-hmm.
basically my PhD. And in terms of what influences transilience and how to increase transilience, that was naturally the next very important research question, because we show that transilience is important. And then the question is, okay, how can we increase it? So, and I do believe there is a difference in terms of the fundamental research. So you can
Mm-hmm.
study it at the level of not abstract, but like psychological constructs, like that what are the variables that are related to transilience. But you can also study it more practically. So you can I don't know, like I think, for instance, one of the things that might be very likely involved in like shifting towards a transilience mindset is the fact of having spaces, like safe spaces for uncomfortable conversations, because I think
Mm.
uh, like change is uncomfortable.
Yes,
And I think people, so that's also another thing that I think is really important about transilience. And I understood this more from personal experience than from what I studied in research. But like you need to go through a state of getting lost, of feeling very vulnerable, of,
the dark
yeah,
night of
like
the soul.
a lot of discomfort, in order to
Yeah,
get somewhere else and to build something different. And I think that in our society, very often we don't want to acknowledge that. We don't want to give space to the fact that this is uncomfortable, and we don't know where we're going, and we don't know how to fully solve this. But I think sitting with those uncomfortable feelings and conversations is what then can bring space for like new ideas and new creativity. So that could be one of the
absolutely.
things that I could think that can
I
influence
like
transmission.
that. And I mean, just yesterday I was talking to this retired professor from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, Mona campus, and she was saying to me all of the research that she and some of her colleagues had done, for example, demonstrates that the tourism model that we have in the Caribbean is not working for us. And this
Mm,
was 30 years ago.
yeah.
And she said, I've been trying in my classes, in my lectures, and teaching people and talking to policymakers and saying, no, this is not right. We shouldn't be doing it this way. And here we are, a generation later, doing the same thing. And this is the main industry in the Caribbean, tourism. And so, similar to what you're saying, people don't like to change. There's also vested interests in holding on to the status quo and keeping things the way they are, and but very powerful vested interests as well. People who've invested a lot of capital, for example.
Yeah.
And so having those difficult conversations on a personal level is hard enough. Could you imagine having those difficult conversations on a country level where it's policymakers, investors, the private sector, even people who are employed in the existing sector? It's not an easy thing to do to transform. But what I really love in this construct, this transilience construct, those three main elements, and maybe this is something we should have emphasized earlier in the conversation, around persisting,
Mhm.
around adapting flexibly,
Mhm.
which means adapting, but not adapting rigidly to the way things are now, adapting flexibly because we recognize that things are going to continue to change and continue to evolve. And
Yes.
the third thing was transforming positively.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Those are the three main elements from what I read in your paper
Yeah.
that underpin transilience:
Yeah.
persistence, adapting flexibly, and transforming positively.
Yeah.
And we can think about these like you have. I'm sure you've spent countless hours thinking about these at an individual level. And
Oof.
since I've
Yeah.
been introduced to your work, I've been thinking about this on a country level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to imagine a mechanism to make this happen. But I
Mm.
feel like one of the most important things that we can do is recognize that, and I guess it's like, the typical, the sort of classic or cliched thing people say is admitting you have a problem is half the battle, right?
For sure.
And I think that's one of the things we need to do, not just as individuals, but again at the country level in the Caribbean. Admit that we have a problem.
Yeah.
Admit that what we've been doing and the way that we've been shaping policy really is not working for us. And therefore, when you have that recognition, and like you were saying, having a safe space to have that kind of reckoning and having that conversation, then you can begin to change.
Yeah.
Um, I, I don't know how to get from where we are to having those conversations, which is why I'm having this conversation with you and having other difficult conversations with other people who have
Yeah.
similar notions, but maybe in different ways, similar ideas that we need to change the things we're doing and the way that
Yeah.
we're doing the things that we do in the
Yeah.
Caribbean. Um, and getting that message out there that it's not about building back better. It's not about resilience, because, like you said, re is back.
Yeah.
It's about transforming to something new. I
Yeah.
think one of the most important things we can do, which is something you speak about in your work, is emphasizing the outcomes that we're looking for. It's not about GDP growth. It's not about what is the inflation rate. It's not about what is the unemployment. It's about well-being, and we don't measure
Mm.
well-being. We have one
Mm-hmm.
country in the Caribbean, the Cayman Islands, that has a well-being index that's fairly new. We know we have Bhutan that measures gross national happiness alongside
Mm-hmm.
gross domestic product. But I think if we shift to measuring well-being, then over time, when you see well-being moving in a direction that is not where you want to go, then people can hold their leaders to account and say, you actually made us worse off in 5 years that you have been in power, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the first step to recognizing that we're not doing the right thing and not doing things the right way.
Yeah. Well, I think so. What I see with bringing the idea of transilience also outside of the academic world, but even in the academic world, is that I think first people need to make a little bit of this shift. Like, it's like, changing the way you look at adversity, changing the way you look at crisis, because yeah, the question is always how we can avoid them, how we can maintain what we have in spite of the adversity. And I think that whole paradigm needs to change into, okay, crises are unavoidable, have been happening, will be happening no matter what. If it's not the environmental, it's the pandemic. If it's not the pandemic, it's the financial. If it's not the financial, it's always been like crisis
It's
after
always going to be
crisis.
a problem. We're always going to have
Exactly.
a problem, a
It's
challenge.
part
Yeah.
of life, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think then embracing and finding like that space for conceiving that that is an opportunity for you to revise your status quo and to change it. That's like already something that people need to say like, oh wow, yeah, like this is a thing. And what I wanted is to kind of make it a little bit more tangible with like a word with like three components. So I feel that it's still quite theoretical because, as I said, it comes from the conceptual philosophical stuff. But with the studies, etc., I try to make it more concrete. And I think first is, yeah, like changing the way we look at things. And something that I want to specify before I have all the resilience people hating me. I mean, they're free to hate me, but the idea is, I'm not against resilience. Like, I'm not saying that resilience is to be thrown out of the window. Is And resilience is very desirable in certain things. So for instance, in the context of an athlete, if an athlete has an injury, you want the athlete to bounce back in certain parameters. You want them to be able to perform at the same way where they were performing. So I think in some contexts resilience is relevant, and it might be the desirable framework. But what I believe, and what was also the starter of my PhD journey, was, if we're talking about adaptation, given that crises are unavoidable, then the idea that every crisis kind of forces us to change is what to me sounds most adaptive. Like, that sounds
Right.
more like adaptation. So I think starting to get into this mindset is the first step. And then for sure, I think considering people's well-being and letting people know that, the leaders care about people's well-being, and that they take people's well-being into account, is also another thing that might also help getting people on board with this kind of like changes, which
Yeah,
doesn't
I
mean
love
that it's
that.
not going to be uncomfortable, because I
Yeah.
think that there's no way out of it. But I think acknowledging the discomfort and talking about it, not necessarily to find a solution, but like, um, so I can bring you an example. Do you know the Patagonia, the brand,
Yes.
the cloth brand? Like,
Yes.
really also into environmental activism and stuff. And there is a beautiful book by, well, multiple books by the founder. And
Uh-huh.
in his first book, that is called "Let My People Go Surfing," which is beautiful, he tells the story of how he came up with the idea of Patagonia, and what was how it was developed, etc. And at some point, they have a bit of like a crisis, because they cannot really match their values of sustainability with the capitalistic push for growth and constantly selling more and doing. So they find and then at some point they were, yeah, not selling more every year, and like so they were risking like the I don't remember if the bankrupt, but anyways, it was not going well. And what the founder did is that, what he took all the managers, and he invited a bunch of philosophers, and he took them to go for a hike. I don't know where, but like beautiful mountains, probably also in Patagonia, I don't know. And they were just there for a week or something like that, just sharing thoughts and thinking about these existential questions and sharing their discomfort, and through that process they came up with a new way to exist in business that is not based on constant growth. I am summarizing it and simplifying it a lot, but so I think something like that could be a good way in political and corporate, and in any environment, like just to give space for. So embrace the perspective of crisis as catalysts for evolution, and then give space to the discomfort that comes with it, and the sense of not knowing where you're going.
It's creative destruction in a
Yeah,
sense, you
yeah,
know? It's so funny because I mean, I guess, me being older generation, we have this idea of we think we know how things should work. And, there's this uncertainty index that I look at all the time. And right now, uncertainty, the level of uncertainty is the highest it has ever been, like even
yeah.
higher than COVID, even higher than financial crisis. It's and that tells you, if people are experiencing all of this uncertainty, it means that they had an expectation that is not
Mm,
being met with reality. And so, to your point, it's about changing our attitude to what's going to always be in front of us, which is crisis,
yeah,
right? And letting go of the expectations of getting back to where we used to be, for example, and
yeah,
maybe not having that expectation. and
Yeah.
therefore that reduces the uncertainty to a certain extent, but also just embracing uncertainty.
Yeah. That's
I know
also a
Deepak Chopra
constant.
talks. Yes, exactly. And Deepak Chopra talks about that, that uncertainty is that space for unlimited possibility,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
right now, so if you think about that, then we are in the space on a global scale of unlimited possibility. So, and it just made me think of like this weekend, I was having a chat with my daughter, and she's like, you know, that there's this thing heading towards Earth at the speed that they've never seen before. And they're saying it might be a comet, but who knows, mommy, it might be aliens. And I'm like, please, like, and she's like, I hope it's aliens. I would love to see aliens. And I'm just thinking, these young people have a completely different mindset than we
Oh
do.
yeah,
Like,
for
I don't want
sure.
to see aliens, and I don't know. I said, you know how much disease they're gonna bring, and what? Suppose they want to eat us, and she's like, so if they want to eat us, then they eat us. I won't have to work and pay bills. Like that would be great. So it just struck me that this idea of predictability, this idea of how life should be, is something that we're wedded to, that actually creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of negativity. Whereas, here is this 20-year-old, I wouldn't say child, young adult who's going, no, man, I bring the aliens.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
this is
No, I definitely.
unlimited possibilities, right? Infinite
Definitely.
possibilities in her head. Infinite possibility is where she lives mentally. And I'm just thinking, wow, I wish I could be like this.
Yeah, it's a mindset shift, but I think indeed that's like a great example of this change. And I mean, there are many domains also in the personal development. Like everyone knows that humans like predictability, and our brain is made to predict, right? So that's kind of like part of human nature, and I don't think we can fully change that, but we can complement it, I feel, with a different approach, which is also very widely, sorry, also wildly, but widely demonstrated by history. Like that was also
Hmm.
one of the things that I encountered at the start of my PhD. Like there are so many examples, even about past encounters with climate change. Of course, this like contemporary climate change is unprecedented in many ways, but like humans have encountered climate change before, and thanks to climate change, there is now like a demonstrated um, proof, let's say, that those encounters with climate change were fundamental for progress, and that
Right.
thanks to these encounters with climate change, there were like new technologies, new professions, new crops, new war strategies, like all kinds of stuff that were developed because of this adversity, let's say. So I think there is like very good evidence that this is a phenomenon, this is a thing. And I think
Yeah,
aiming for that, or knowing that that's a possibility, and trying to understand, okay, when is it wiser to maintain, or what should we maintain and what should we change. But like the only constant of life is change, so I think the
absolutely.
sooner
Hmm.
we embrace that, the better off maybe we are, or not, I don't know, but I think it's worth trying for sure.
So changing our attitudes mentally towards
Yeah.
uncertainty, towards crisis, towards change.
Yeah.
That's the
It's
first
not it's
thing.
not sorry to interrupt you, but it's not a chance that transilience is theorized as a perception, like it's the perceived capacity to persist, adapt flexibly, and positively transform. And I actually got the criticism many times during my, well, not many, but a few times during my PhD, and even in my defense, in my PhD defense, of people saying, yeah, you assessed perceived capacity, but you didn't assess actual capacity. So how do you know if this perceived capacity? But the truth is that there are plenty of studies that also show that humans are very much driven by perception. Like what you
Yes.
perceive, what you believe is way more
Create your
important
reality.
than
Yeah.
what reality tells you. So there are also studies, for instance, on social support, and the extent to which you perceive that you have social support is way more important than whether you objectively have
Actually have
people
it.
around
Yes.
you, you know? So
Yes.
I think the
Yes.
perception is it's very key, and it links to this mindset, to this psychological aspect of it. So yeah.
Right. But also perception, your perception is what creates your own reality,
Exactly. Exactly.
irrespective of what is factually existing, you know?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
yes, so for me, the takeaways would be on an individual level, and then, we can scale up to, as you said, a neighborhood, community, country level, changing our ideas and mindsets around change itself, around crisis,
Yeah.
around uncertainty, and learning to embrace that because we're always going to have it.
Yeah.
So there's no point in saying, "Oh my gosh, we're in a crisis all the time." We're
Yeah.
always going to be in a crisis. So change
Yes,
the
more or less. Yeah.
change the attitude. Um, Persist. So
Yeah.
we keep on keeping on, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Uh, um, Positive. No, that's the third one. Which one is it again?
Adapting
Adapt flexibly.
flexibly. Yeah.
Adapt flexibly. So we adapt, but we make sure that we can continue to have adaptation in that adaptation. So
Yeah.
flexibility in the adaptation, not not fixed, not a fixed or rigid adaptation, and then positively transform.
Yeah.
And I just love this because this is, relevant on an individual level, on a family level, of course, community, and then more so country. And I really like this idea and this framework that you came up with, and this word transilience. I was in
Thank you.
Vanuatu. I spent about a month in the Pacific in April of this year, and I was talking with a lot of people in Vanuatu, and was talking with this guy, Milton. I hope he's
Hmm.
watching this video. Milton, shout out in Vanuatu. We were talking, we were having these kinds of conversations, and I said, well, there's this word that this lady um, came up with, and I love it. And I said transilience, and he goes, transilience, and I didn't tell him what it meant or nothing. I love that word. He goes, I love that word. I'm going to use this word. I'm like, yes. And so then
Nice.
we had this big conference close to the end of my stay there, and he spoke. I spoke as well, and he spoke about transilience. And
Oh
I sent
wow.
him your paper. Yeah, I sent him your paper, and it's a word that I used as well in my speech. And I think it's really it really resonates with me. And those four factors, um changing our mindset, we will always be in a crisis, persisting, adapting flexibly, and positively transforming. I just love that. And I feel like, if policymakers can start thinking about those things, and also thinking about not measuring as Patagonia did, not measuring growth, but as individuals and as countries measuring well-being,
Yeah.
then that measurement of well-being will give us clues as to whether or not we're doing the right thing and doing things right. um
Yeah. Absolutely.
so
And if I can add to that, so maybe I should define the three components just for clarity so that people really know what we're talking about, at least in my framework. Persistence is indeed the perceived capacity to carry on. So it's not about being stubborn, but it's about having like this determination of like, okay,
to
this is
keep
super
going.
hard, but we're going to keep going somehow. The adaptability or the perceived capacity to adapt flexibly, I define it more about exactly what you said. So, like a broadened kind of mindset in terms of the extent to which people see they can find multiple options or multiple ways to adapt so that they don't get fixated into one way, but they stay open to many possibilities, and they believe in the fact that there have to be many possibilities. I might not know the details, but I feel there has to be a way. And then the transformability is indeed the perceived capacity to positively transform because of the adversity. So I don't know, learning something or growing or finding advantages, and like trying also to emphasize those aspects. So for sure, what you say, the shift in mindset, I would say also including this, acknowledging the discomfort, what we said, that this is an uncomfortable process. It's not fun, but we need to do it. And then I would say also the community and the support aspect. Like I also know this more from personal experience than from research, because I didn't have the time to study it. But I think supporting each other through this process can also, uh, let's say, help us deal with better with the discomfort that comes with it. So I think also, because I told you I have one chapter in my dissertation that is about collective transilience, and we have two studies there, and we see that actually collective transilience seems more powerful than individual
Mhm.
transilience in the relationships with well-being and with adaptation behaviors, which to me seems to suggest that indeed, like this connection to others and this perception that we can do it, like we can adapt, we can persist, adapt flexibly and positively transform, uh, is more powerful than whether I perceive that I alone can do it, because also this kind of global adversities are not affecting people in isolation. Like there's always some sort of collectivity involved in this sort of crisis. So I think it is relevant at the personal level as well, of course, and we do see that individual transilience is important, but I think also the collective level is very relevant and interesting for sure. And I think having this um, possibility to support each other, even just through listening of like the struggles that someone and the discomfort that someone has, can already be a very powerful way to incorporate transilience more.
Yes, I love that. I mean, communities, we're learning more and more that community is so important. And
Yeah.
in, the modern world, we've moved so much away from that, right?
Hmm.
But this is something I see that's really big in Vanuatu, in the Pacific
Nice.
on the whole, and in rural communities in general. I think in most countries,
Yeah.
there is a greater sense of community, but we've become so urbanized. Um, but I just want to thank you, Valentina. This has been like,
Thank
it's one
you.
of these conversations, and reading your work has been, you feel like your brain is just like, I could imagine if I looked in the mirror, my head might look this big now. Lights me up.
I'm very glad. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it really empowers, thinking and creating, having, creative thinking, um, and just brainstorming, understanding that where we are is not really working, but there is a solution out there and we can find it, or many solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this has been an incredibly uplifting conversation. I thank you
I'm
very,
very
very
glad.
much.
Thank you so much for
And
having me. It was a
it's
pleasure.
been an honor and a pleasure, and I was, hoping this would happen. It's been a while in coming, but everything good is worth waiting for. So I really appreciate your
Thank you.
time. I appreciate that you've done this work and that you're willing to share it with me and
Yeah,
with my audience. And I hope
absolutely.
that the people who pay attention will go and read your work as well.
Thank you very much, Marla. I really appreciate your invitation and your openness to this framework. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see where we go with this.
Great. Thank you so much. Take
Thank you
care.
very much.
So let's talk about what we learned in this discussion with Valentina. To just summarize, I want to emphasize the point that we've been focusing in the Caribbean and in small island developing states more broadly. We've been focusing on the idea of resilience. We've been focusing on the idea of build back better. But the point I want to make is that actually we are and have been the slowest growing region in the world for decades. We don't necessarily have the progress in most countries in the Caribbean and SIDS more broadly. We don't see the progress that we would have liked to see, particularly in this century. And so, why are we trying to go back to that? Why are we trying to build back something that we are not entirely satisfied with in the first place. The concept of transilience, which by the way was born out of a philosopher, not an economist, is is about adapting given the adversity that we're facing, adapting and transforming in a positive manner into something new and something that's going to take us forward, something that's adapted to the climate that we have now and that we will have in the future. So I really urge you to understand and to look at where you've been focusing on resilience, and let's see how we can shift to an idea of transilience. So, and also let's think about when we want to transform into something better, what does that transformation look like? We know renewable energy is going to be a part of that. But what about the ideas of transforming our economic structure? The fact that we have tourism sectors, for example, that we don't know for sure are net foreign exchange and net fiscal earners for our countries. So let's think about what transformation into something new could look like for us in terms of our economic structure. So that's in summary what I would like to leave you with for this discussion with Valentina. And of course, we really appreciate that she spent the time to chat with us.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I decided to join for a few minutes live from Jamaica. That interview with Valentina was recorded before Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica. And I felt it was important to bring that into context, but also take some questions. And I have some questions and comments that came in on social media. And I wanted to, with the few minutes we have left before the top of the hour, to just address some of those. Derek Luckpat, for example, talked about how difficult these conversations are to have at a country level, even an individual level, around transformation. He says the key word is transition, and that while we take short-term steps to address pressing issues, a collaborative approach to addressing the underlying root causes of these polycrises through rethinking is what's necessary. And I absolutely agree with that. I know the world right now is going through this sort of phase of, people talking about the end of multilateralism, the end of collaboration on a country level internationally. But I actually see things a bit differently. I think in the region, CARICOM, for example, has made some progress around, instead of making every decision having to be unanimous, we have this idea of the coalition of the willing. If a few of us decide we want to move ahead with something, we can, and the others who don't want to just yet can decide later on. I also see a lot of collaboration in the private sector, and I think that there is still, multilateralism is still alive and well in certain spheres. We do have at the ICJ that opinion on climate change and obligations of states. That's a huge win for this, for the climate crisis, but also for multilateralism. We have the UN Tax Convention negotiations ongoing. That's also, to me, a huge indication of the fact that multilateralism is still here to stay. So I feel like we need to recognize that in the Caribbean, we have our own niche way of collaborating, and we inherently understand the value of it, even if politically sometimes there isn't always that appreciation. We as Caribbean people are very good at collaborating. I'm here in Jamaica, and it was quite how should I say this? It hit me hard to see the amount of people arriving, like I have, in Jamaica to help support the relief effort. Some people are here just purely for that reason, and the amount of things and stuff people were bringing in suitcases. For example, one of my suitcases didn't come because the plane was overloaded, because everybody's bringing supplies to help Jamaica. And And these people are coming from all over the place, from all over the Caribbean, from the United States. And it was just really heartwarming to see the outpouring of support and community, as we discussed in this interview with Valentina. So I think that that collaborative approach is something we in the Caribbean understand very well. And I thank you for your comment, Derek. We did have a couple of questions coming in. One of them is, what is the most important transformation that Jamaica can make now, post Melissa? And as we discussed in the last edition of this show, with Dr. Damian King from Capri in Jamaica and with Isaac Anthony from CRIF, Jamaica had done everything right in terms of its fiscal and economic management. And then you had Hurricane Melissa hit and wipe out, it's 8 and growing $1 billion of damage from this one storm. What's the biggest transformation Jamaica can continue to make? I actually think that Jamaica's done an amazing job. The multilateral development banks have done an amazing job of coming forward and giving support financially to Jamaica, because we don't want a situation where Jamaica goes from a debt to GDP before this storm of about 58, 59% now to go back to 150% where it was, say, 2011. We would not want to see that and see the people of Jamaica suffer through that kind of fiscal adjustment that would be required if you take on that kind of debt. And so it's good to see the multilateral development banks coming out to help. I personally think, and I wrote about this in my monthly report that was released on, I think, Monday of this week, that perhaps there's room for some sort of like an evergreen fund for Jamaica that's funded by the diaspora and investors more broadly in Jamaican dollars and in US dollars, with low denomination subscriptions to this fund. I mean, if you make it too high, then you're targeting sophisticated investors. Perhaps we can look at targeting unsophisticated small investors with low subscription levels. That means that when you have lots of people subscribing and giving their investment money, there's a smaller chance of it being rescheduled or restructured by the government if they're in financial difficulty. So I actually personally think a fund like this might be useful for Jamaica, as opposed to traditional sovereign debt being taken on to finance the reconstruction efforts here in Jamaica. Let me look at some other questions here. Collective transilience, the community's perceived capacity to persist, adapt, and positively transform. What can policymakers and the private sector do to strengthen collective transilience in Caribbean communities before the next hurricane season? This is an excellent question. Jamaica has this really powerful structure or institution, as I called it, the EPOC, which I don't think is functional anymore. I know they have the Fiscal Commission that replaced the EPOC, but I think that that collaboration between the private sector and public sector, labor movement, for example, that took place under the EPOC in Jamaica, which I talk about a lot, I think that's a brilliant and perfect example of this collective transilience and positive transformation that took place out of that, because it drives accountability for delivering the results that you're here to deliver. Perhaps this is something we discussed in the last Finding Our Freedom episode. In terms of preparing for the next hurricane season and preparing for the next disaster, because there will be one, like Valentina said, there will always be a crisis. We need a playbook. It feels to me like we really need a playbook of this is what we do. Like in school, when we had fire drills, in businesses, you have your fire drills and you have your muster point. Everybody collects at this muster point when something happens, when an alarm goes off. We need, I think, as countries and in the region, to have a system and a process in place from before the hurricanes arrive. How do we prepare? Cayman, they spend the month of May, I think it is, preparing, trimming trees, doing drills, everybody stocking up on supplies, and then having awareness of where are the shelters, which shelter is relevant for you, what do you do in your home, having all your documents in Ziploc bags and things like this. I feel like we need, and that has to start from schools, right? I think we really need a playbook that prepares us on an individual level, family level, collective, community level, and then country level for these kinds of disasters. And I think there are some countries that are making some strides in that direction, and perhaps we should share that information, because there's no point reinventing the wheel if one country already has it done. Looking at another question here. Okay, Jamaica had done everything right. You have said fiscal discipline, primary surpluses, credit rating upgrades, catastrophe bond, yet Hurricane Melissa wiped out 8 billion in a day. What are the foundations we have to change that? The reforms until now in Jamaica have not addressed. Yeah, I think the reforms, I think we have to be very specific about disaster preparedness. I know that people in this space have talked a lot about that we are not sufficiently disaster prepared. And like I said, I feel like we really need a playbook around that. I think we really need an education intervention that starts from the preschool level all the way through primary, secondary school, and then at businesses and at workplaces, that makes sure that we're adequately prepared at various levels for these crises. And when they do happen, for example, what's the fastest way that you can remit money to people? There's all kinds of frictions around getting money to people. And even in some cases, them saying, don't send money because there's nothing for me to buy. How do you get food and basic supplies sent to people in the aftermath of a crisis? I feel like this crisis in Jamaica can be a very good sort of a template or a model for us to craft a process and a playbook around disaster preparedness. I saw a question somebody wrote, why should we transform? Shouldn't the rest of the world solve the problem it created? And that's a valid point. The whole climate justice argument is actually quite valid. However, the COP result in Brazil recently that I wrote about in the editorial of my monthly report that was released on Monday, this was a disappointing result, actually. I mean, some countries did commit more, but there was no commitment to phase out fossil fuels at any point in time, which was a disappointment. I think that was one of the biggest expectations. But I will say that even if you can attribute blame, and even if climate justice can be evidenced and justified on many levels, the fact of the matter is, unless the countries that we rely on to make it right, unless they're willing to pay out, where does that leave us? Are we going to just sit and wait for them to pay out? And then it might never happen, at least not to the extent that we expect. And so I don't believe that that's the right approach at all. We cannot just sit and wait and hope that other countries will bail us out of this crisis. I think whatever we have within our control, we should pursue. And there's a lot we can do. I mean, when I spoke to the last edition of this show, Isaac Anthony from the CRIF SBC talked about the insurance mechanisms available at an individual level and a country level. I don't have any more time left, so I just want to say thank you to you, the audience. Thank you to Valentina for the interview. Thank you to all of you who sent in questions and comments. I really appreciate all of your time and attention to this. And I look forward to your feedback. Thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.